The widow's hands trembled as she counted the coins for the third time, knowing no matter how many times she repeated the ritual, there would never be enough to save her ranch from the bank. Sarah Catherine Winters stood behind the weathered counter of her late husband's general store in Nogales, Arizona, watching the desert sun bleed crimson across the territorial sky in the summer of 1882, and wondered if hope was something she had buried alongside Thomas 3 years ago. The bell above the door chimed, and a tall figure filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the dying light. Sarah looked up, her breath catching despite herself. The man removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of the desert sage that grew wild in the arroyos surrounding town. He moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin, his boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor despite his size. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "I heard you might be looking for help with a cattle drive." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I'm afraid you heard wrong, Mr. Holloway. Harrison Holloway Iverson." He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of leather and sage and something indefinably masculine. "And I know what I heard. Your foreman, Miguel Sanchez, mentioned in the saloon that you've got 200 head that need moving to Tucson before the end of the month, or the bank takes everything." Heat flooded her cheeks, part embarrassment, part anger. "Miguel talks too much when he drinks. Maybe. Or maybe he cares enough about you to seek help when you're too stubborn to ask for it yourself." Harrison's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in those gray eyes that made her look away. "I can't afford to hire another hand," she said, the admission tasting like dust in her mouth. "I can barely pay Miguel and the 2 boys I've got working the ranch. I'm not asking for wages." That made her look up sharply. "Then what do you want?" Harrison set his hat on the counter between them, a gesture that felt strangely intimate. "A chance to prove that not all men are like the ones who have hurt you." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're fighting to keep what's yours in a territory that doesn't make it easy for a woman alone. I know you get up before dawn and work until you can barely stand, and still it's never enough. I know that look in your eyes, the one that says you've forgotten what it feels like to have someone stand beside you instead of expecting you to stand alone." He paused, his gaze holding hers with uncomfortable intensity. "And I know fear when I see it because I've worn it myself." "I'm not afraid," she said, but her voice betrayed her with its unsteadiness. "You're terrified," he said quietly, "but not of losing the ranch. You're afraid of hoping it might work out, because hope hurts more than resignation when it gets torn away." The words hit her like a physical blow, so accurate they stole her breath. Sarah turned away, gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles went white. "You should leave, Mr. Iverson." "Can't do that." "Why not?" "Because I made a promise to myself when I rode into town this morning. I saw you standing outside the bank, holding yourself so straight and proud while that snake Richardson told you he'd be taking possession of your property. I saw your face when you thought no one was looking, and I swore I'd do something about it. I don't need your pity." The words came out sharp as broken glass. "Good thing I'm not offering any." Harrison picked up his hat, turning it in his hands. "I'm offering partnership. Help me help you get those cattle to market, and whatever profit we make above what you owe the bank, we split 60-40, your favor." "That's ridiculous. You'd be doing all the work and taking less than half. I'd be doing what needs doing and taking what's fair. You've kept those animals alive through drought and thieves and bad luck. That's worth more than a few weeks of trail work." Sarah turned back to face him, searching his features for the angle, the hidden agenda. Men didn't make offers like this without expecting something in return. But Harrison's expression remained open, almost gentle, and that frightened her more than any demand would have. "I'm afraid to hope again," she whispered, the confession escaping before she could stop it. Harrison stepped forward, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Then let me hope for both of us." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Finally, Sarah nodded once, sharp and decisive. "1 month. We get the cattle to Tucson, sell them, and settle accounts. After that, you ride on." Something that might have been disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. 1 month. They shook hands, his palm warm and calloused against hers, and Sarah tried to ignore the way her heart kicked against her ribs at the contact. Harrison moved into the small bunkhouse behind the ranch the next morning, arriving with nothing but a worn saddle, a bedroll, and a roan gelding that looked as road-weary as its owner. Miguel welcomed him with cautious optimism, while the two young ranch hands, Bobby and Jim, regarded him with open curiosity. "You really going to get us to Tucson?" Bobby asked, barely 18 and still more enthusiasm than experience. "We're going to get us to Tucson," Harrison corrected. "This is everyone's drive, everyone's stake in making it work." He spent the first 3 days riding the property boundaries with Miguel, learning the lay of the land and the condition of the herd. Sarah watched from a distance, telling herself she was simply being prudent, not noticing the way Harrison sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, or how he listened to Miguel's stories about the ranch with genuine interest. On the 4th day, Harrison knocked on the main house door just after sunrise. Sarah answered, still braiding her honey-colored hair, and felt herself flush when his gaze followed the movement of her fingers. "Thought you might want to ride out with me today," he said. "See how the cattle are shaping up. I have the store to mind. Mrs. Henderson said she'd be happy to watch it for a few hours. I already asked." Sarah's irritation flared. "You have no right to arrange my schedule. You're right, I apologize." Harrison's contrition seemed genuine. "I just thought you might want to see your stock before we start the drive. These are your animals, your livelihood. You should know exactly what we're working with." The logic was sound, even if his presumption rankled. Sarah finished braiding her hair, pinned it into a coil at the base of her neck, and grabbed her hat from its peg. "Give me 5 minutes to saddle Daisy." "Already done." "Mr. Iverson, you are going to have to stop making decisions for me." "Yes, madam, I'll work on that." But there was a hint of amusement in his eyes that suggested he found her irritation more endearing than intimidating. They rode out as the sun climbed over the Santa Cruz Mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. The cattle were scattered across the scrubland, hardy animals adapted to the harsh Arizona territory. Harrison pointed out which ones would lead the drive, which would need extra watching, his observations sharp and knowledgeable. "You've done this before," Sarah said. "Grew up on a ranch in Texas." "Started driving cattle when I was 14. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "Lost it all 5 years ago to drought and debt. Watched my father break himself trying to hold onto land that was killing us. Swore I'd never let myself care that much about anything again." "Then why are you here?" Harrison turned to look at her, his expression unguarded. "Because somewhere between Texas and Arizona, I figured out that not caring is just another way of dying. Just takes longer." The honesty in his words made her chest ache. Sarah looked away, focusing on the cattle dotting the landscape like slow-moving clouds. "My husband died trying to break a horse that everyone told him couldn't be broken. Thomas always believed if he just tried hard enough, worked long enough, he could make anything succeed. The horse fell on him, crushed his chest. He was 28 years old. I'm sorry." Everyone was sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. I loved him, but loving him meant watching him destroy himself chasing dreams that were never going to come true. This ranch, it was his obsession, and now it's my burden. Does it have to be a burden? Sarah's laugh was sharp. What else would you call property that demands everything and gives back barely enough to survive? Home, Harrison said simply. Purpose. Legacy. The thing worth fighting for even when the fight seems impossible. That sounds like something Thomas would have said. Maybe he was right about some things, even if he went about them wrong. They rode in silence for a while, checking the water sources that would determine their route to Tucson. Harrison pointed out that one of the windmills needed repair, and immediately set about fixing it, his movements efficient and practiced. Sarah found herself watching the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the way sweat dampened the fabric between his shoulder blades, and forced herself to look away. "Why haven't you married again?" Harrison asked suddenly, not looking up from his work. "That's a presumptuous question." "You're right, forget I asked." But the question lingered in the air between them. Sarah dismounted, walking to the edge of the stock tank where water trickled from the repaired windmill. Men in this territory want one of two things from a widow. They want her property or they want her body. Sometimes both. None of them want her. Harrison finished tightening the final bolt and straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "That's their failure, not yours." "Is it? Maybe I'm just not worth the effort." He was beside her in 3 strides, his hand gentle but firm on her shoulder, turning her to face him. "Don't you ever say that again. You're worth everything, Sarah Catherine Winters. Every dawn you choose to keep fighting. Every time you stand up when it would be easier to stay down. You're the strongest person I've met, and any man too blind to see that doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you." The intensity in his voice, the fierce conviction in his eyes, made something crack in the careful walls she'd built around her heart. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "You don't know me well enough to say that, maybe not, but I know enough." His thumb traced a small circle on her shoulder, the gesture unconsciously tender. "And I'd like to know more if you'd let me." "This is a business arrangement," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "It could be more. It can't. Won't." She stepped back, breaking the contact. "In 3 weeks you'll be gone, and I'll still be here trying to hold together a life that's falling apart. I can't afford to want something I can't keep." "What if I stayed?" The words hung between them like a prayer. Sarah shook her head, mounting her horse with perhaps more force than necessary. "Let's get back. I've been away from the store too long." They rode home in silence, but the air felt charged, electric with possibility and danger. The preparations for the cattle drive consumed the next 10 days. Harrison proved to be exactly what he'd promised. An experienced trail hand who knew every aspect of moving livestock across hostile territory. He negotiated with the Apache who controlled parts of their route, promising respect for their land and a portion of the profits in exchange for safe passage. He drilled Bobby and Jim on night watch procedures and emergency protocols. He worked alongside Miguel to repair saddles, check horseshoes, and inventory supplies. And every evening, he found some reason to stop by the main house. Sometimes it was a question about the route. Sometimes he brought Sarah wildflowers he'd found growing in impossible places, bright splashes of color against the desert brown. Once, he brought her a book of poetry he'd found in town, its pages worn soft with reading. "I didn't figure you for a poetry reader," Sarah said, turning the book over in her hands. "My mother loved Whitman, used to read to us every evening after supper." Harrison's smile was sad and sweet. "She said poetry was proof that beautiful things could survive in a world that tried to crush them." Sarah opened the book to a random page, finding a passage marked in faded pencil. "I am larger, better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness." She looked up at him. "Is this what you think of me?" "It's what I know about you, even if you don't see it yourself yet." These moments terrified her more than any threat from bandits or weather. The growing tenderness between them felt inevitable and impossible all at once. Sarah caught herself watching for Harrison throughout the day, her heart lifting when she saw him riding in from the range. She noticed details she had no business noticing: the way his hair curled when it got too long, the scar on his left hand shaped like a crescent moon, the rare, full smile that transformed his entire face. She was falling, and there was nothing to catch her but the hope she'd sworn to abandon. The night before the drive, Miguel organized a small celebration in the bunkhouse. Bobby played a battered guitar while Jim sang off-key, and they passed around a bottle of whiskey that was probably older than both boys combined. Sarah surprised everyone by joining them, needing the distraction from her own thoughts. Harrison sat across the room, his back against the wall, watching her with those steady gray eyes. When Bobby asked Sarah to dance, Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. She let the boy spin her around the cramped space, laughing at his enthusiasm if not his skill. "You're good for him," Miguel said quietly, settling beside Harrison. "For all of us. Haven't seen the Senora smile like that in 3 years." "She deserves to smile every day," Harrison replied, his gaze never leaving Sarah. "You planning to stick around after Tucson?" "That depends on her." Miguel nodded slowly. "She's been hurt bad, not just losing Thomas. Before that, too. Her father sold her practically to Thomas to settle gambling debts. Thomas wasn't a bad man, but he was weak. Let his pride make decisions his body couldn't back up. She's learned not to trust men who make promises. Then I'll have to prove I'm different. Words are easy, amigo. Actions are what matter, I know." Harrison finally looked at Miguel. "That's why I'm here." When the celebration wound down, Harrison walked Sarah back to the main house. The desert night was cool, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. They stood on her porch, neither quite ready to say goodnight. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Harrison asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "Everything depends on this drive. If we don't make it, I lose the ranch. If we lose cattle along the way, I might not clear enough to pay the bank. There are about 100 ways this could go wrong. And one way it could go right. That's the one I'm focused on." Sarah smiled despite herself. "Is it really that simple for you?" "Nothing simple. But worrying about all the things that might go wrong doesn't prevent them. It just steals your peace twice, once in the anticipation and once in the reality if it happens." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear. "We're going to make it, Sarah, I promise you. Don't make promises you can't keep." "I've never broken a promise in my life. Don't intend to start now." She wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. Instead of answering, she stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek, brief and chaste. "Thank you. For everything you've done already." Harrison's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "That's not the kiss I want from you. I know." Her voice was barely a whisper, "but it's all I can give right now. Then I'll wait for the rest." The cattle drive began at first light, the herd moving slowly but steadily south toward Tucson. Harrison rode point, setting the pace and choosing the route, while Miguel brought up the rear, keeping the stragglers moving. Bobby and Jim flanked the sides, and Sarah rode wherever she was needed, her rifle ready and her eyes scanning the horizon for trouble. The first 2 days passed without incident, the cattle settling into the rhythm of the drive. They camped at a creek the second night, the water a welcome luxury after the dust of the trail. Sarah helped prepare the evening meal, working alongside the men with practiced ease. "You're good at this," Harrison said, accepting a plate of beans and salt pork. "I've done my share of camp cooking." Thomas and I did a drive every year for the first 5 years we were married. After he died, I couldn't manage it alone. "You're not alone anymore." The simple statement made her throat tight. "For now." Harrison set down his plate, his expression serious. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm not here because I feel obligated. I'm not here out of pity or charity. I'm here because from the moment I saw you standing up to that banker, I knew I'd found something worth fighting for. Someone worth fighting for. You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're brave and stubborn and kind. I know you put everyone else's needs before your own. I know you've been carrying weight that would break most people, and you do it without complaint. I know when you smile, really smile, it feels like the sun coming up after a long night." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "And I know I want the chance to learn everything else. Every scar, every story, every dream you thought you had to give up." "Harrison." She didn't know what to say, how to respond to such raw honesty. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Whatever happens in Tucson, whatever you decide after we sell the herd, I'm not going to regret this. Being here with you, it's the most right thing I've done in 5 years." That night, Sarah lay in her bedroll staring at the stars, listening to the sounds of the sleeping camp around her. Harrison had taken first watch, and she could see his silhouette against the darkness, solid and reassuring. She thought about his words, about the possibility he represented, and for the first time in 3 years, let herself imagine a future that included more than just survival. The third day brought their first real challenge. They reached a river crossing that should have been shallow, but recent rains in the mountains had swollen it to twice its normal width. The water ran fast and dark, dangerous for cattle and horses alike. "We'll have to find another way across," Miguel said, studying the churning current. "There isn't another way, not without adding 4 days to the drive," Harrison replied. "We'd run out of water before we reached the next crossing." "Then what do you suggest?" Harrison dismounted, walking along the bank to study the current. "We cross here, but we do it smart. I'll go first with a rope, find the best path and secure a line. Then we bring the horses across one at a time, using the rope as a guide. Once we've got the horses safe, we push the cattle through fast, using the horses to guide them." "That's dangerous," Sarah said. "If you get swept downstream." "I won't." Harrison checked his saddle cinch, his movements calm and methodical. "But if something does happen, Miguel knows the way to Tucson. You keep going, sell the herd, save the ranch." "Absolutely not." Sarah's voice came out sharper than she intended. "We're not crossing until we know it's safe. We'll wait for the water to go down." "We don't have time to wait. You've got 9 days to get these cattle to market." "I don't care. I'm not risking your life for a ranch that's probably lost anyway." Harrison turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her heart stutter. "The ranch isn't lost, and I'm not risking my life. I'm doing my job. Your job doesn't include drowning in a flooded river." "Sarah." He took her hands in his, oblivious to Miguel and the boys watching with undisguised interest. "I've crossed 100 rivers worse than this. I know what I'm doing, but I need you to trust me." "I do trust you. That's what scares me." His smile was gentle. "Good scared or bad scared?" "I don't know yet." Harrison squeezed her hands once, then released her and mounted his horse. He secured one end of a rope to a sturdy tree, coiled the rest around his saddle horn, and urged his gelding into the water. Sarah's heart climbed into her throat as horse and rider entered the current, water rising quickly to the gelding's chest. The crossing was nerve-wracking. Harrison made it look easy, but Sarah saw the moments when the current tried to push them downstream. the way the horse had to swim in places rather than walk. When they reached the far side, Harrison secured the rope and waved them forward. Miguel went next, then Bobby, then Jim, each crossing nerve-wracking but successful. Sarah went last, clinging to the rope as her mare Daisy struggled against the current. Halfway across, Daisy lost her footing and they plunged into deeper water. Sarah felt herself slipping from the saddle, her fingers losing their grip on the slick rope. Then Harrison was there, his horse plunging back into the river, his arm iron strong around her waist. "I've got you. Hold on to me." She wrapped her arms around his waist, her face pressed against his back, feeling the steady strength of him as he guided both horses to the far bank. When they reached safety, she was shaking, whether from cold or fear or relief she couldn't say. Harrison dismounted and lifted her down from his horse, his hands gentle on her waist. "You're all right. You're safe. You came back for me." "Of course I came back for you. Did you think I wouldn't?" Sarah looked up at him, water dripping from her hair, her clothes soaked through, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. "I thought maybe you'd let Miguel do it. He's closer, a better swimmer." "Sarah." Harrison's voice was rough. "I will always come for you, always. You need to understand that." She kissed him then, rising on her toes to press her mouth to his, salt and river water and something sweet and desperate mingling between them. Harrison made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, one hand fisting in her wet hair, the other spanning her back. The kiss was hungry and tender all at once, 3 weeks of denial and longing pouring into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah saw Miguel and the boys had tactfully busied themselves with the cattle. She laughed, slightly hysterical. "That was probably not the wisest thing I've ever done." "Best thing you've done since I met you," Harrison countered, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Though I'd prefer the next one happen when you're not soaking wet and freezing. My timing has never been great. Your timing is perfect." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a plea. "But we should get you into dry clothes before you catch pneumonia." The rest of the day passed in a haze. Sarah changed into dry clothes, but she couldn't shake the memory of Harrison's kiss, the way he'd held her like she was something precious and fragile and infinitely valuable. She caught him watching her throughout the afternoon, his expression tender in a way that made her breath catch. That evening, after the cattle had settled and the others had gone to sleep, Harrison came to where Sarah sat staring into the dying fire. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling beside her. "Too much on my mind. Anything you want to talk about?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. Not in a dramatic, romantic way, just over. Like the story had ended and I was just waiting through the epilogue until I could stop pretending." She looked at him, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Then you walked into my store, and suddenly there's this possibility of chapters I never thought I'd get to write." "What kind of chapters?" "The scary kind. The ones where I let myself want things, let myself care about someone knowing I might lose them. Let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, life could be more than just surviving." Harrison took her hand, his fingers threading through hers. "Life should be more than surviving. It should be waking up excited for the day. It should be laughter and plans and the kind of love that makes you grateful you kept breathing through the hard parts. Is that what you want with me?" "Yes." No hesitation, no equivocation. "I want every morning and every evening. I want to build something with you that lasts. I want to be the reason you smile, and I want you to be my reason for everything." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, catching the firelight. "I'm afraid I don't know how to do this anymore, how to be someone's partner, their person. Then we'll figure it out together." Harrison brushed away her tears with gentle fingers. You said you were afraid to hope. I understand that. Hope is terrifying because it makes you vulnerable. But Sarah, a life without hope is just existence, and you deserve so much more than that. What if it doesn't work? What if I disappoint you or you realize I'm not worth the effort? Not possible. You're already worth everything. He pulled her close, and she went willingly, resting her head against his shoulder. I know you're scared, but I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. We take it one day at a time, one moment at a time, and we build something worth keeping. I want to believe that. Then start. Right now. Believe that tomorrow the sun will come up and we'll be one day closer to Tucson. Believe that we're going to sell those cattle and save your ranch. Believe that when this drive is over, we're going to have the conversation about what comes next, and it's going to have a good answer. Sarah tilted her face up, meeting his eyes in the firelight. What if I told you I'm already starting to believe? Harrison's smile was sunrise bright. Then I'd say we're making progress. He kissed her again, slow and deep, and Sarah let herself sink into it, into him, into the possibility of a future she'd stopped dreaming about. When they finally parted, she stayed in his arms, listening to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and thought that maybe, just maybe, hope wasn't such a dangerous thing after all. The next 5 days tested them all. They faced a dust storm that scattered part of the herd, requiring hours of work to round them all up again. They dealt with a broken axle on the supply wagon that cost them half a day. They navigated around a band of outlaws Miguel spotted shadowing them, taking a longer route to avoid confrontation. Through it all, Harrison remained steady, his confidence never wavering even when circumstances grew dire. And Sarah found herself leaning into that strength, not because she couldn't handle things herself, but because sharing the burden made it lighter. She saw Harrison do the same, asking her opinion on decisions, deferring to her knowledge about individual animals in the herd, treating her as the equal partner she was. You're different with him, Miguel observed one evening as they watched Harrison working with Bobby to repair a saddle. Lighter somehow. Is that a bad thing? It's a very good thing, Senora. You've carried heavy for too long. It's good to see you let someone else help. I'm not sure I know how to do this, Sarah admitted. How to be with someone without losing myself. Miguel smiled, his weathered face creasing with warmth. You don't lose yourself, Senora. You find the parts of yourself you'd forgotten existed, the parts that can laugh and dream and love. That's not loss. That's reclamation. On the 8th day, they reached the outskirts of Tucson. The cattle were road weary but in good condition, and Harrison negotiated with the stockyard manager for permission to hold them overnight while they arranged the sale. They booked rooms at a modest hotel, and Sarah luxuriated in a real bath, washing away 9 days of trail dust and exhaustion. She dressed carefully that evening in the one good dress she'd packed, a simple blue cotton that matched her eyes. When she descended to the hotel dining room, she found Harrison waiting, cleaned up and looking unfairly handsome in a pressed shirt and vest. You look beautiful, he said, rising to pull out her chair. You clean up pretty well yourself. They ordered dinner, but Sarah could barely eat, her stomach in knots. Tomorrow they would sell the herd. Tomorrow she would know if she'd saved the ranch or lost everything. Tomorrow she would have to make a decision about Harrison, about them, about a future that felt simultaneously too close and impossibly far away. Sarah. Harrison reached across the table, taking her hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll handle it, together. What if the cattle don't sell for enough? What if all of this was for nothing? Then we'll figure out plan B, but I don't think that's going to happen. I've already had 3 buyers asking about them. Good quality cattle are hard to come by, and yours are some of the best I've seen. You're just saying that to make me feel better. I'm saying it because it's true. You've done good work, Sarah. Your ranch, your herd, it's something to be proud of. After dinner, they walked through the streets of Tucson, the evening air cooling rapidly as the sun set. Harrison kept her hand tucked in the crook of his elbow, and Sarah felt something settle inside her, a rightness she hadn't experienced in years. "Tell me about your family," she said. "You mentioned your mother and the ranch in Texas, but not much else. Not much else to tell." "My father was a hard man, determined to wring success from land that didn't want to cooperate. My mother was his opposite, soft where he was hard, patient where he was demanding. I have two sisters, both married now with families of their own back in Texas. After we lost the ranch, I couldn't stay. Everywhere I looked reminded me of failure. So you've been drifting, working ranches, doing trail drives, anything to keep moving. I told myself I didn't want roots, didn't want the responsibility of caring about something I could lose." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Then I met you, and suddenly roots don't sound like a trap anymore. They sound like home. Harrison." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're what I've been looking for without knowing I was searching. You're where I want to plant roots and build a life and grow old watching sunsets from a porch we share. I love you too." The words escaped before she could stop them, but Sarah found she didn't want to stop them. They felt right, true, like something that had always existed waiting to be spoken aloud. "I'm still scared, but I love you and I want to try. I want to believe we can make this work." Harrison cupped her face in his hands, his eyes shining with emotion. "We can. We will. I promise you, Sarah Catherine Winters, I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that your hope was worth the risk." He kissed her there on the street, and Sarah kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into the contact. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing and crying all at once, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they were beginning. "Take me back to the hotel," she whispered against his mouth. Harrison's eyes darkened with understanding. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They barely made it to her room before Harrison was kissing her again, his hands gentle but urgent as they mapped the curves of her body through the cotton of her dress. Sarah fumbled with the buttons on his shirt, her fingers clumsy with want and anticipation. When skin finally met skin, they both gasped at the contact. "I want you," she breathed against his neck. "I want all of you." Harrison lifted her in his arms, carrying her to the bed with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Then you'll have me, tonight and every night after if you'll let me." They came together like a storm breaking, all heat and desperation and need. But underneath the passion was something deeper, a connection that transcended physical desire. When Harrison moved inside her, when their eyes met and held in the lamplight, Sarah felt something fundamental shift. This wasn't just bodies joining. This was souls recognizing their other half, finding the peace that made them complete. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin, hearts gradually slowing from their frantic pace. Harrison traced patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch idle and affectionate. "I meant what I said earlier," he murmured into her hair. "I want this forever. I want to marry you, build a life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night." Sarah propped herself up on her elbow, studying his face in the dim light. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a statement of intent. The actual proposal will be better, more romantic, with a ring and all the words I've been practicing in my head for the last week." She laughed, the sound light and free. "I don't need romance, I just need you. You're getting both. Romance and me package deal." He pulled her back down against his chest, his arms secure around her. "But first we get through tomorrow, sell the cattle, pay off the bank, secure your ranch. Then I'll do this properly." Our ranch, Sarah corrected softly. If we're doing this, if we're building a life together, it's our ranch, our future. Harrison's arms tightened around her. Our ranch, our future. I like the sound of that. The cattle auction the next morning drew a good crowd of buyers. Harrison stayed close to Sarah as they watched the bidding, his hand a steady pressure at the small of her back. When the final tally came in, Sarah had to read the numbers twice to believe them. After the stockyard took their percentage, she would clear enough to pay the bank in full with $2,000 left over. "We did it," she whispered, staring at the check in disbelief. "We actually did it." Harrison swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite the curious looks from other ranchers. "You did it. You saved your ranch." "Our ranch," she corrected, pressing her forehead against his. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Partners," he agreed, setting her back on her feet. "In ranching and everything else." They took care of business quickly, paying Miguel and the boys their wages plus generous bonuses. Miguel accepted his money with a knowing smile. "So the cowboy stays?" he asked Sarah. "The cowboy stays," she confirmed, glancing at Harrison with undisguised affection. "Good. The ranch needs a man's hand, and you need someone who sees you properly." They made the journey back to Nogales in record time, eager to return home and begin their new life together. Sarah went straight to the bank, marching into Richardson's office with her head held high and the check clutched in her hand. "I believe this settles our account," she said, placing the check on his desk with perhaps more force than necessary. Richardson's face went through several interesting color changes as he examined the check. "This appears to be in order," he said stiffly. "I'll have the paperwork drawn up releasing the lien on your property." "Our property," Sarah corrected, glancing back at Harrison, who waited in the doorway. "My partner and I will expect those papers by the end of the week." Outside, Harrison caught her around the waist, pulling her close. "Did you see his face when you said partner? I thought he might choke." "Good, let him choke. Let the whole town know you're staying and we're partners, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me." "Fierce," Harrison said approvingly. "I like it." The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Harrison moved his few possessions into the main house, and Sarah discovered the strange joy of sharing her space with someone. They fell into routines, Harrison making coffee each morning while Sarah prepared breakfast, taking turns with evening chores, sitting together on the porch after dinner to watch the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Miguel and the boys accepted Harrison's permanent presence with easy welcome. Bobby and Jim looked up to him, soaking up his knowledge about ranching and livestock. Miguel treated him like the son he'd never had, teaching him the particulars of Sarah's ranch while learning from Harrison's broader experience. One evening, about a month after they returned from Tucson, Harrison saddled 2 horses and asked Sarah to ride out with him. They traveled to a spot overlooking the ranch, where the land stretched out before them in all its harsh, beautiful glory. "I used to come here when things got bad," Sarah said, dismounting to stand at the edge of the overlook. "It reminded me that the world was bigger than my problems." "It's a good spot." Harrison came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on top of her head. "Perfect for what I have in mind." "And what's that?" He turned her in his arms, then dropped to one knee. From his pocket, he pulled a ring, simple silver with a small turquoise stone. "It's not much. The stone came from an Apache trader Miguel introduced me to. He said turquoise represents protection and strength. Seemed fitting for you." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "Sarah Catherine Winters, you walked into my life and gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. You gave me purpose and hope and a reason to believe in tomorrow." You're the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life earning the gift of your trust. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner in everything, your husband, the man who gets to love you for the rest of our days?" "Yes," she managed through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were crying, both laughing, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were beginning. "When?" Harrison asked. "I don't want to wait. I've already waited my whole life to find you. 2 weeks. Just enough time to arrange things properly. I want Miguel to stand with us, and Mrs. Henderson has been hinting that she'd love to help plan a wedding." 2 weeks, Harrison agreed. "And then you'll be Sarah Iverson." "Sarah Catherine Iverson," she corrected. "I'm keeping the Catherine. It was my mother's name." Sarah Catherine Iverson. Perfect. They were married on a brilliant October afternoon in the small church in Nogales, with half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Henderson insisted on buying her, and Harrison wore a new suit that made him look impossibly handsome. Miguel walked Sarah down the aisle in the absence of her father, his eyes suspiciously bright. Bobby and Jim served as groomsmen, trying to look solemn and mostly succeeding, when the preacher asked if Harrison would take Sarah as his lawfully wedded wife. His "I do" rang through the church, clear and certain. When Sarah gave her own vows, her voice steady and strong, Harrison's smile was bright enough to power the sun. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and a fiddle player Miguel knew providing music. They danced their first dance as husband and wife while the assembled guests cheered, Harrison holding Sarah like she was made of precious glass. "Happy?" he asked, spinning her gently. "Happier than I knew was possible. You kept your promise." "Which one?" "You hoped for both of us until I could hope again on my own." She stretched up to kiss him, not caring who saw, "And you gave me a reason to believe that hope was worth the risk. You were always worth the risk, worth everything." Harrison pulled her closer, his lips against her ear. "And this is just the beginning, Mrs. Iverson. We've got decades ahead of us to build something beautiful." The party lasted well into the evening, but eventually, Harrison and Sarah slipped away to the main house, now truly their home. Inside, Harrison lifted her in his arms, carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. "Tradition," he said, setting her down gently in their bedroom. "And I intend to honor every tradition when it comes to showing you how much I love you." He proved that statement thoroughly over the next hours, learning her body with reverent attention, bringing her to peaks of pleasure she'd never imagined. When they finally lay spent and satisfied, tangled together in sheets that smelled of lavender and love, Sarah felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you," Harrison replied, his hand finding hers beneath the covers, their wedding rings clicking softly together. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. There was a hard winter that tested their resources and resilience. There were disagreements about ranch management, heated discussions that sometimes ended with one of them sleeping on the couch. There were moments when Sarah's old fears resurfaced, when she pulled away convinced Harrison would realize his mistake and leave. But every time doubt crept in, Harrison was there to chase it away. With patient words and steady actions, he proved again and again that he was staying, that she was enough, that their life together was exactly what he wanted. In the spring, Sarah missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx the possibility. But when she missed a second month and her body began to show other telltale signs, She could no longer deny what was happening. She told Harrison one evening after dinner, simply and directly, "I'm pregnant." Harrison went very still, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." He set down his fork carefully, then crossed to her in 2 long strides, dropping to his knees beside her chair. His hands went to her still flat stomach, reverent and wondering. "We're having a baby." "Yes." Sarah's voice shook with emotion. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Harrison looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Sarah, I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely breathe. We're going to have a baby, our baby." He kissed her stomach, then her mouth, tender and sweet. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for trusting me enough to build this life with me." "I'm scared," she admitted. "Childbirth is dangerous. Women die. What if something goes wrong?" "Then we'll handle it together. But nothing is going to go wrong. You're strong and healthy, and we'll make sure you have the best care possible." He pulled her into his lap, cradling her close. "We're in this together, remember. You don't have to be scared alone anymore." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Sarah continued working the ranch through her first months, only gradually scaling back as her belly swelled. Harrison became comically overprotective, hovering whenever she lifted anything heavier than a book, insisting she rest when she showed any sign of fatigue. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," she told him one afternoon when he refused to let her help with fencing repairs. "I know. But you're carrying our child, and I'm not taking any chances with either of you." Miguel found their dynamic endlessly amusing, telling Sarah that she'd turned the tough cowboy into a mother hen. But underneath, the teasing was genuine affection and excitement. The whole ranch seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the new arrival. Sarah went into labor on a cold March morning in 1884, nearly 2 years after Harrison had walked into her store and changed everything. The labor was long and difficult, lasting almost 20 hours. Harrison stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her brow, talking her through the worst of the pain. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Harrison cried openly, cradling the tiny bundle against his chest with infinite gentleness. "He's beautiful," he breathed. "Sarah, he's absolutely perfect. Let me see him." Sarah held out her arms, and Harrison carefully placed their son against her chest. She studied the tiny features, already seeing traces of Harrison in the shape of his mouth, the set of his ears. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you. What should we name him?" Harrison asked, perched on the edge of the bed, one arm around Sarah, the other hand cradling their son's head. "I was thinking Henry Thomas Iverson." She looked up at Harrison. "Henry for a fresh start, Thomas to honor the past." "If that's all right with you." "It's perfect. Henry Thomas Iverson." Harrison kissed her forehead, then their son's. "Welcome to the world, Henry. Your mother and I have been hoping for you." The adjustment to parenthood was both harder and easier than Sarah expected. Henry was a colicky baby, prone to crying fits that nothing seemed to soothe. Sarah spent countless nights walking the floor with him, exhausted and frustrated and desperately in love all at once. Harrison took his share of night duties, often more than his share, insisting Sarah needed rest to recover from childbirth. "I don't know how people do this multiple times," Sarah said one particularly difficult night, bouncing Henry against her shoulder while he screamed. "Because the good moments outweigh the hard ones," Harrison said, taking Henry from her. "Go back to bed, I've got him. You have to be up early for the spring roundup. I'll survive. You need sleep more than I do right now." Watching Harrison with their son, the infinite patience he showed, the gentle confidence in his handling of the tiny human they'd created, Sarah fell in love with him all over again. This was the life she'd been afraid to hope for, and it was more beautiful than any dream could have captured. Henry eventually outgrew his colic, transforming into a happy, curious baby who seemed fascinated by everything around him. Harrison built him a cradle that rocked with the push of a toe, carved with horses and cattle and scenes of ranch life. Miguel whittled toys, an entire menagerie of wooden animals. Mrs. Henderson knitted blankets and booties and tiny hats. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Harrison's experience combined with Sarah's intimate knowledge of the land and livestock created a successful operation that became known throughout the territory for quality cattle and fair dealing. They hired additional hands as the herd grew, building a reputation as good employers who treated workers with respect and paid fair wages. When Henry was 2, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she'd learned to accept help and rest when she needed it. Their daughter was born on a blazing July afternoon, arriving much faster than her brother had, with a lusty cry that made Harrison laugh. "She's going to be a handful," he predicted, watching the tiny girl nurse hungrily. "Takes after her mother then," Sarah replied, stroking their daughter's dark hair. They named her Emma Catherine, and she was indeed a handful. Where Henry was thoughtful and cautious, Emma was fearless and impulsive, climbing everything, exploring everything, keeping her parents in a constant state of vigilance. "She's going to give us gray hair before we're 40, Harrison said, pulling a 3-year-old Emma out of the horse trough for the second time in one day. "But she's going to be magnificent," Sarah countered, wrapping their dripping daughter in a towel. "Look at that determination, that curiosity. She's going to do amazing things." The years flowed past, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Henry started school, learning to read and write and cipher. Emma followed 2 years later, charming her teachers with her enthusiasm if not always her discipline. They had another son, Jacob Harrison, when Emma was 4, and then a final daughter, Grace, 3 years after that. Through it all, Harrison and Sarah's partnership deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, how to navigate disagreements without damage, how to support without smothering. They built a life rich with purpose and meaning, raising children who knew they were loved, creating a ranch that stood as testament to what could be accomplished when two people worked together toward common goals. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Harrison woke Sarah before dawn, insisting she ride out with him to the overlook where he'd proposed all those years ago. They left the children in Miguel's capable care, riding through the pre-dawn darkness to the spot that held such significance for them both. As the sun rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Harrison pulled Sarah close, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Do you remember standing here 15 years ago, so scared to hope?" he asked quietly. "I remember thinking I'd lost my mind, agreeing to marry a man I'd only known a few months. Best decision you ever made, though," Sarah laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "Second best." "Oh." "And what was the first?" Deciding to hope again. Deciding to trust that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. She cupped his face in her hands, seeing the lines that 15 years and 4 children had etched there, the gray beginning to thread through his dark hair, the evidence of a life well lived. "You gave me that, Harrison. You walked into my store and offered me hope when I'd forgotten what it felt like. You've given me 15 years of love and partnership and purpose. You've given me children and home and a future I never dared dream about." "We gave each other that," Harrison corrected. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more. You gave me a reason to stop running, a place to plant roots, a life worth living." He kissed her, slow and deep and still capable of making her knees weak after 15 years. "I love you, Sarah Catherine Iverson. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. I love you too, today, tomorrow, and all the days after." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, two people who had found each other against all odds, built something beautiful from broken pieces, and created a legacy that would outlast them both. The ranch stretched out below them, prosperous and thriving. Their children were back home, likely driving Miguel to distraction. The future was full of possibility and promise, and it had all started because a cowboy walked into a store and saw a woman worth fighting for, worth hoping for, worth building a life beside. Sarah had been afraid to hope again. Harrison had hoped for both of them until she found her way back to believing. And together, they'd created something more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. Their life wasn't perfect. There were still hard times, setbacks, challenges that tested their resolve and resilience. But through everything, they faced it together, partners in truth and triumph and everything between. They watched their children grow, Henry following in his father's footsteps to become a skilled rancher, Emma defying expectations to become a teacher, Jacob splitting his time between ranching and the law, Grace discovering a talent for medicine. They celebrated births and mourned deaths. They watched the territory change around them, civilization creeping in to tame the wild edges. They grew old together, their bodies accumulating the scars and aches of a life fully lived, but their love never diminishing, never fading. On their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren at the ranch that had become home to multiple generations, Harrison stood to make a toast. His hair was silver now, his face weathered, but his eyes still held the same steady certainty they'd had the day he walked into Sarah's store. 40 years ago, I made a promise to a woman I'd known only a few weeks. I promised her that hope was worth the risk, that we could build something lasting, that love was strong enough to overcome fear. He looked at Sarah, his hand finding hers automatically. "I've spent every day since keeping that promise, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." Sarah stood beside him, her hair more silver than gold now, her hands marked with the work of decades, her face lined with years of laughter and tears and living. 40 years ago, I was afraid to hope. Then a cowboy told me he'd hope for both of us until I remembered how. He kept that promise, and in doing so, gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. She looked around at the assembled family, at the legacy they'd built together. This is what hope looks like. This is what happens when you're brave enough to believe in tomorrow, even when today feels impossible. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and stories that got more embellished with each retelling. When the guests finally departed and the house grew quiet, Harrison and Sarah sat together on the porch swing he'd built 30 years ago, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "No regrets?" Sarah asked, her head on his shoulder. "Not a single one. You. Only that I didn't say yes faster when you first offered to help with the cattle drive." Harrison laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "We got there in the end, that's what matters. We did. We really did." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, hearts beating in the rhythm they'd established over 4 decades of partnership. The ranch around them was quiet, the cattle settled, the horses drowsing in the barn. It was a peace earned through hard work and sacrifice, through choosing love when fear screamed to run, through building something one day at a time until those days accumulated into a lifetime. In the distance, a coyote called, its voice carrying across the desert darkness. Harrison tightened his arm around Sarah. and she snuggled closer, grateful beyond measure for the cowboy who had walked into her life when she needed him most, who had offered hope when hers had run dry, who had proved with 40 years of steady love that some promises were meant to be kept forever. The night deepened, stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. And on the porch of a ranch house in Arizona territory, two people who had saved each other sat together, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every triumph that had brought them to this perfect evening. Their story had begun with fear and reluctance, with walls built high and hope buried deep. But it had transformed into something rare and precious, a love that had weathered decades and emerged stronger for the tempering. As they finally rose to head inside, Sarah paused at the door, looking back at the land spread out before them, silvered by moonlight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for hoping when I couldn't, for staying when I expected you to leave, for loving me enough to be patient while I learned to love myself again." Harrison kissed her temple, his lips gentle against her hair. "Thank you for letting me, for being brave enough to try, for building this life with me." He opened the door, gesturing her inside with courtly grace that 40 years hadn't diminished. "Now come to bed, Mrs. Iverson. We've got tomorrow to look forward to and all the tomorrows after that." Sarah smiled, taking his offered hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the strength that had never wavered, the love that had transformed everything. "All the tomorrows," she agreed. "Together." They closed the door on the night, on the ranch they'd built, on a legacy that would outlive them both. Inside, the house held 40 years of memories, of laughter and tears, of children raised and dreams realized, of hope reborn and love triumphant. And in the master bedroom, two people who had found each other when both were lost climbed into bed, fitting together as naturally as breathing, and fell asleep holding hands, hearts full, souls content, and grateful beyond words for the day a cowboy had walked into a store and offered to hope for both of them.